In this tutorial, we're going to look at something called line types. A line type is a type of style that we can give to our lines. As you can see here, I have 3 lines. I've drawn them at 5,000 units across, and they're just solid lines we can see right here, right now. Now, if you have your AutoCAD window set up like mine, in the AutoCAD Classic style, you'll see that we have up here a line control box that we can look at. And at the moment, as you see, we've got by layer, by block, continuous, and other. So that's the only ones we have loaded in at the moment. Well, it's pretty much continuous. Now, if we want to load some new line styles, line type styles, we can type LT at the command prompt, press space or enter, and it'll bring us up our line type manager. Again, it shows us what's currently available, which is pretty much just continuous. So if we want to use a different type of line type, we can click on load. Now it'll load a file called the AutoCAD ISO.lin file, or something similar to that. It'll be a .lin type file, and as you can see, if we drag down the slider here, we've got different types of line types that we can associate to our lines. So what I'll do is, this time around, is I'll grab these 3 here, dash, dash 2, and dash times 2, and the way I'm going to do that is I've selected one with my left mouse button, and if I hold down my control key, I can select others, and then when I've made my selection, I can click OK, and as you can see, they've now loaded into the line type dialog box here. So we'll click OK. That's now taken us back to model space, and what we'll do is we'll assign one of these line types to each one of these different lines. So I can just highlight the line and then go up to our drop down box, and I'll click on dashed. Let's now set that to a dash line type, and we'll change the next one to dash 2, and the next one to dash times 2. Now, as you can see, it's very hard to see the dashed lines. If I scroll in, we'll zoom in a bit, you can just see them, but as I said, these lines have been drawn at 5,000 units in terms of millimeters, so 5 meters, and as you can see, if you were to print this out at any kind of scale, the dashed lines would be pretty much useless. You wouldn't really see them at all. So if we go back to our line type dialog box by typing LT and pressing space or enter, you can see at the bottom of the box here we have this area here called global scale factor. Now that affects all the lines in AutoCAD. So by changing that up, we can change it to perhaps 10 and click OK. You can see that the lines have now become a much bigger scale, so it's a bit easier to see. And if we go back to our window again, we'll change it to 25 and click OK. You can see once again they're bigger again. Now it can be a bit of trial and error to start off with, to get that the way you want it to look. You'll generally know when you do a preview before you plot how it's going to look. Of course, we'll get into that further on down in the course. This sort of just a basic understanding of it, and how we can load in our different styles, and that there is a scale associated to them. You may have noticed too, inside this box here, the line types, we have another tick here. We'll get to that too later when we're looking at setting up our paper space layouts, and we're going to set up our drawings for plot. Generally here, the current object scale, I would leave that at 1 in your drawing. I think personally that the way that AutoCAD was designed with this line type manager could have been designed a lot better, to be honest. You'll find, particularly if you work on a lot of drawings over time, that even sometimes changing these scale factors, if somebody's imported lines from another drawing, you can still get a bit of a mess. It doesn't necessarily update all the lines very well. So yeah, and I find it's an area that often confuses people an awful lot. So we'll just try and keep it simple for now. So just keep it with your global scale factor. Again, we'll just load another line type so you can see other types of line types. So we'll click on the load, and we'll perhaps go right to the bottom here with zigzag. We'll click OK, and it's now loaded in. Click OK again. Now what I'll do is I'm going to select this line, and I'm going to change it to zigzag. As you can see, we have zigzag. Now say for instance we like these dashed lines at this scale, but this zigzag one perhaps is a little maybe too big or not big enough. We can actually also alter the scale of particular lines, line types, just by going over to our properties window here on the left. And as you can see, we have a section here on the general category that says line type scale. Generally they're set to 1. We could click on, press 5 and press enter. As you can see, it's become quite massive. We can also give it a decimal figure, so say 0.5, and it's much smaller. So you can do that too on lines if you need to or want to. These line type things that I'm showing too don't just work on straight lines. You can apply them to circles. So as you can see, I've copied that pattern to this one. The command that I use to copy that style to this style is a command called match properties, just so you know. So to match properties to anything, you generally press the MA keys and then press space or enter. I'll just create some more circles, and we'll do that now. Type MA, so as you can see it's come up at the bottom of the command prompt, match prop, and we'll press space or enter, and it'll ask me now to select the source object, that's what we want, and then we'll click on what this object is to become. So, and we can do that with this as well. And you can pretty much apply the line types to any kind of drawing shape. There are limitations with certain things, but generally anything that you'll use to draw, as you've seen in the earlier lessons, this can be applied to. That's sort of the basics for now that we'll look at. You can also create your own line types. That's another lesson in itself. I do another video on that if you want to look around on my channel that talks about just how to go about doing that. To create a line type though, as far as I know at this point in time, you need to have a full version of AutoCAD to do it. An LT version, you won't be able to create your own line type that I'm aware of, unless there's some new program that's come out or way to do it that I'm not aware of. But we'll leave that here for now, and we'll look at that in further detail down the track. In this next lesson, we're continuing on from the previous one. This time we're going to be looking at something called layers. Layers allow us to organize our drawing to make it more efficient to work with by turning objects on and off. So to do that, we can type just the word layer at our command prompt and press space or enter. It'll bring up a window that looks something like this. It may look a little different to mine depending on the version of AutoCAD you have. Now if we look over on the left here, it just says all, and all use layers. And currently in all we have one layer called 0. Now all AutoCAD drawings that you open will always have at least one layer called 0. You can create many layers, but there always must be one in there, and as I said, anytime you open a new template or any drawing, brand new one, there's always going to be a layer 0 in there. Now let's have a look at some of the properties of this layer. We have here something that says on, we've got freeze, if we expand that, we've got lock, we've got color, line type, line weight, and transparency, plot, and if I stretch that over a bit, and we can move this along here, we've got plot, new VP freeze, and description. So let's have a look at those things. The on and off thing, which we can just do by left clicking on there. It's just asking us here now by clicking on it if we want to turn that current layer off, and we'll click on yes. As you can see, as I click on it, a little light globe goes on and off. It's asking me that again to turn it off. Now if I close this window by clicking on the X, you can see that the lines we had there before have now disappeared. You'll also notice up here we have a drop down box that if I left click on, you can now see the layer that we're currently on, and that light globe's there. We can play with those a few of those features there just by left clicking on them. So if I left click on that light globe and then press left click on model space somewhere, you can see that those lines have come back again. And then we'll do that again. We have the one next to it that says freeze or thaw. If we left click that actually you can't left click when you freeze or thaw your current layer, so I'll show you that in a moment. But basically they look the same. We'll go in through the difference in a moment. So what we'll do is we'll reopen our layer manager. You can either type layer at the command prompt, press space or enter, or up here you can just left click this button. Okay, so what we'll do is, so I can show you the difference between these on and off and freeze and thaw commands, is we'll create a new layer. So up here you'll see we have some buttons here. So if we left click this one for new layer, it's now created a new layer and it's asking us for a name. So we could just call this wall for now. Press space or enter. And as you can see here, there's also next to these layers a green tick next to one of them. That means that that's the current layer. That's the one that's currently selected. If I left click wall like I have now, which is highlighted in blue, and click this green tick, it now means wall is the current layer. So let's go back to our model space window. As I set up here before in our drop down box here, layer drop down box, we have the freeze and thaw. If I left click on that, you can see that the lines have disappeared again. And we'll left click it again, come back on, and we'll show you the on and off. As you can see, they look very similar, and graphically on the screen they do look very similar. The difference is that if I freeze the layer and now I type E space for erase and type all and press enter twice, if we look at the command prompt, it's found 0 objects. So those objects are still there, but because they were frozen, they weren't able to be deleted. Now if I left click on the on off button, the lines are now off. Now if I erase, type E space and type all, it's now found 3 objects, and I press enter, you'll find that even if I turn this layer back on, the lines are now gone, so it's deleted them. So I'll just undo that. So the difference basically is that turning a layer on or off just makes them visually disappear, but they're still able to be erased by doing something like I did before with the erase command. And by freezing a layer, they also disappear from the screen, but also means that they can't be edited, they can't be erased even though you can't see them. You might be wondering why you might do that. I think this stems back to much earlier versions of AutoCAD and also computers that were probably of lesser power, that by turning something off, although it's visually not there on the screen, it's still sort of loaded in the AutoCAD memory, so that when you turned it back on, it didn't have to try and reload all those lines and that again, because it had kept them in the memory even though it didn't show them on the screen. Where freezing something pretty much deletes them from memory. I don't think that's such an issue with a lot of computers nowadays, with the power of them and the amount of RAM and so forth. I mean, some drawings can get pretty big and complex still, so it could still be useful in some of those cases, but I've found from my experience that today that's not such an issue. So I think that if you are going to want to hide something, I think it's best just to keep with the freeze. Okay, now you also see here there's a padlock. So if I left click that, you can see it's now locked, and it's now sort of grayed out our lines. So if I select those and try to erase them, at the command prompt down the bottom here, it just says, 3 were on a locked layer. So we can't erase anything on a locked layer. So that sort of works similar to the freeze, where it locks it, but this time it's frozen, but it can't be deleted, but we can actually still see it. So that's sort of the difference between them two. Now to change to a line to another layer, we can just select it and then select on another layer. And if I just press escape, we're currently on the wall layer as we put the big green tick next to it before. But if I select on that line, you can still see that it says wall in our layer drop down box. And if I deselect that and then select the line below it, and we go back up to our layer box, you can see that it's on layer 0. So whatever object we currently selected, it'll tell us what layer it's on. If you do select multiple objects that are on different layers, as you can see, it just blanks it out. So something to be aware of. Now another thing we can do, if we go back to our layer manager, is we can change the color of our layers, which is obviously quite a good thing to do. So if you left click on the color, we have what we call the very first tab here is the index color. That's the color anywhere between 1 to 255. That's pretty much the standard old school AutoCAD palette from a very long time ago. So we can select any one of these colors that we like, or even any of the ones down here. The ones below here are generally the default AutoCAD colors that are used more than any others. So we have red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, white, and then colors 8 and 9, which are the grayscale. They're sort of the standard colors that AutoCAD generally uses, but as I said, you can pick any of these colors. Depending on also the version of AutoCAD you have, you'll see that you may have some other tabs such as True Color, where you can sort of mix the color that you want using these sliders. You can also put in the RGB numbers if you're familiar with that type of color scheme. And then we have color books, which is a bit like using the Pantone colors, so you can be very specific. They could be useful for using on hatch patterns, which we'll talk about later again, as a solid hatch for colors on your AutoCAD drawings. If you want to print out a specific color, that could be very useful. I personally tend to not need any of those things and tend to stick with these colors that are in the general index color. So let's click on this color red and we'll click OK. And as you can see, wall now has a color of red assigned to it. So if I go back to model space, you can see that we have our layer, this line on that layer of wall, and it's now red because anything that's on that layer will now be that color. Something to be aware of though too, that you can actually change the colors on another layer. For instance, this line's also on wall and it's red, but if we look at our color control drop down box, if any line set to by layer, it'll match the color of that layer that's been set in our layer manager. But I can also change that if I wanted to yellow. So you're not restricted to having to keep everything the same color on the same layer. You can change it if you need to or want to. I think best practice is to try and keep it as consistent as possible on the same layer as the same color, if possible. At times you may need to make some changes, but overall I think that's a good practice. If we go back to our layer manager, we've also got line type. So in the last lesson we loaded in some line types, so now we can also load line types into our layer. So we could perhaps select zigzag and click OK. We'll close the layer manager, and as you can see, our line here, which is on layer wall, has now got the zigzag pattern. And if we draw another line, because we're already on the wall layer still, you can see that it's zigzag as well. Now this line here is also on wall, but again, if we go up to our line type drop down box, that's already set to independently on dashed. But if we set that back to by layer, it too will go with the default line type that overrides everything else. But as I said, you can override any of the things that are on layers, whether it be the color or the line type. So again, I can change that to dashed. So it does give you that flexibility. There is one thing I will touch on over here too, is another drop down box is the thickness of the pen that you're going to be plotting out at. Now I understand the ability and the purpose of this drop down box that Autodesk have put in to AutoCAD, and it could be useful for people, but personally I think that it's just asking for trouble. The reason being is, for instance, I could have many lines on a layer and they could all be red, but they could all be assigned to different line thicknesses, and I wouldn't have any idea what the different ones were until I either went to plot and found quite big differences, or if I individually selected each one to find out what it is. So my personal opinion is to leave that by layer at all times, and try and leave all your lines by layer and not set them to individual things. We'll talk about line type scales or thicknesses when you plot later on, and another way to go about doing that, which is my preferred way. As I said earlier in this course, that there's often many ways to do the same thing in AutoCAD. It does come down to preference. I'm just talking here from experience about what I've found to be the best way to work. So we'll go back to our layer manager, and here again we have our line weights, which similar to what we're looking at in that drop down box, and we can set this here. Now that would be a better way to go about it if you wanted to use this method. Again, I don't use this method. I know a lot of people do. As I said, it's another way to work. There's another way that I'll show you later on, the way I work. You can make up your mind how you prefer to work. So you could use this line weight box here, and we could set this to a 0.25mm pen for when we plot, and that means everything on that layer will be printing at that, no matter what color it is or anything like that. It'll always print at that thickness of pen, unless of course we used, I'll just close this over here and change the line to a specific thing. But again, as I've said, that's it's asking for confusion and trouble, I think, down the track. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that back to just default. Okay, and now we slide over a bit more. We won't worry about these right now, the transparency and plot styles. This one here, plot, is basically, as you can see, looks like a little icon of a printer. If I left click on that, you can see that it's now got a little red circle next to it. By doing that, what that means is that layer, despite the fact it's got lines on it and we can use it and edit the lines and so forth, when it comes to plot time, that nothing on that layer will plot. You might be wondering why you want to do that. There are many cases. We'll talk about that in more depth further on in the course, but it's something to be aware of. It is something that does have its purpose. This one here as well, the new VP freeze, the VP stands for viewport. We won't look at that right now. We will be looking at it later on. So we'll just won't worry about that right now. And description is basically if you wanted to give your layer a description. That's all it basically is. So we could say, this is a wall type, and that's all it does. It doesn't do anything more than that, than perhaps give someone else who may look at the drawing some more information about what that layer is all about. Okay, so we scroll back over, and that's sort of the basics of the layers. There's other things we can do too about grouping layers together and so forth. If you haven't quite understood what the purpose of the layers are, you'll probably learn more in the exercise that we do about the use of them. To give you an example just now though, we may have, we'll create another layer. So we'll left click here, and we'll call it furniture. Okay, and we'll give that another color. Perhaps we'll just pick green. Close that. Now I'm going to select my furniture layer, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle here. Oop. Oh, I've got it on the same line type now. Just going to change that to continuous. Alright. Cool. Okay, I'm not sure if I changed that there. Just a moment. Go back again. Oh, look, I've changed the wrong one. Just a moment. I'll put that back to zigzag, and that one to continuous. Okay. Alright. So this could be a representation of perhaps looking in plan view of a couch or something. So we'll just draw something like that. So that could be a couch. And you may have a whole bunch of walls and so forth going around, and this may be a layout that you're that you're basically now wanting to perhaps use for another purpose rather than showing a furniture layout. You may just want to show the general floor areas or just a coloured floor plan without the furniture. So you could turn that layer off. So in this case, because our furniture layer is currently selected, we couldn't use the freeze command like we talked about earlier, We could use the on and off if we wanted to, if we were certain we weren't going to delete anything, like that, and that's just told us the current layer is turned off. It'll always give you a warning when you're on the current layer and turning it on or off. But if we wanted to thaw that layer, so we could now select a different layer, freeze that layer, we could select another layer, so it's not current anymore, and then we could freeze it. So as you can see, it's now frozen. So that's the basics of that. So turning layers on and off can be useful in that sort of sense. It can also be helpful for large drawings where you may just want to concentrate on a specific type of area. It gives you that flexibility. It also, not just turning things on and off, but it also allows you easy control of just setting maybe a certain line type thickness to a layer or a color to the layer, rather than having to manually go around changing either colors of line types or as I said over here before, this thing here, changing the line type. So again, we'll talk about that later in when we're looking at printing and so forth. The layer also gives us the ability visually with color, being able to change a whole bunch of things to different colors, because I'm sure you could imagine if you had a large floor plan with lots of different things on it and everything was white, it would it'd be pretty harsh on your eyes, I'd think, for starters. But I think that it'd be kind of confusing to perhaps see the difference between what a certain object is. So it has that purpose too. But as I said, we'll learn more about that as the course goes on. So if you have any questions, please leave them below.